The Tiger Mouse is one of the best Tier 9 heavy tanks. It was newly released by Wargaming, and if you're buying loot crates this year, I would say that this is the #1 tank you want to have in your garage. My name is Ladpad, and welcome to the first tank review that I'm releasing on this channel. We're going to be taking a look at the new Tiger Mouse and comparing it to some of its direct competitors. I have two replays for you. This first replay, we're going to cover the statistics of the tank, and we're going to see just how good this gun is in practical use. And then our second replay is going to be the best game I've had in this tank so far. It's going to be an absolute dominant round and one of the best games I've seen in the Tiger Mouse so far in the 5 or so days it's been released in the game. Now, starting off, the Tiger Mouse, I'm going to compare it to the Mausian, its direct competitor in the tech tree, the AMX M451, which is one of the best Tier 9 tanks in the game right now, and the Object 705, which is one of the best tier-for-tier side scrapers in the game, one of my just personal hidden gems in the tech tree, and something that is very strong in its own right. And if you haven't tried it, I would highly recommend you give it a shot. With that said, I think the Tiger Mouse is better, and I'm going to demonstrate why. Starting with the damage per minute. The AMX M451 is the best tank in this regard. It has 2200 plus DPM, but the Tiger Mouse does fall in second and has really splits the difference between the low DPM of the Mausian and then the high DPM of the AMX M451. And so the Tiger Mouse does very, very well with its damage per minute. This is coupled with very good damage per shell. That's 530 damage per shot, which is considerably more than the Mausian, much more than the AMX M451, and a decent bit more than the Object 705. And so what you should know right away is that this tank trades extremely well because it hits really hard against equal tier heavy tanks. It hits really hard, especially against medium tanks, and you can rack up damage just by trading your health in the first place. Couple that with fairly strong, very decent damage per minute, a great rate of fire, and this means that the Tiger Mouse's gun just feels incredible. And the good news does not stop there, because if we take a look at the gun handling, the aim time on the Tiger Mouse is 2.3 seconds, which is not the best in this regard. The Mausian and the AMX both outperform it, but it's considerably better than the Object 705, and with some decent dispersion values, you're definitely able to do a lot in the Tiger Mouse. This accuracy at 0.35 is very, very good. It allows you to hit consistently your shots. I believe with my setup, I'm rocking about 0.32 0.32 accuracy, and so you really hit your shots as you're shooting in this tank. And for something as big and as bulky as the Tiger Mouse is, being able to utilize this is just fantastic. Now, its elevation is 23 degrees, that's decent, and its gun depression is a surprising 7, which, albeit it's worse than something like an AMX for a rear mounted turret. This -7 degrees, it feels very nice. It's definitely not a hold down monster, but it is usable on a ridge. Also, take a look at the replay right now. We're putting in shots at range just because this gun is so accurate and so consistent for a heavy tank. It's not a wonderful tank destroyer gun, it's not an incredible medium tank gun, but to put in shots like that against your opponents at 300 or 400 meters range with consistency is just so much better than you would have in something like an Object 705. Taking a look at the mobility, it's really great news for the Tiger Mouse. The Mausian has a top speed of 20, which is just horrible. The Tiger Mouse has a base speed of 32 kilometers per hour, which is very, very good. It is slower than something like the AMX M451 or the Object 705, but the fact that this tank is a super heavy, moving around at 32, plus you can add on to that things like a turbo, allows this thing to move much, much faster. And the final field mod, which gives you plus 2 kilometers per hour, is just, it's fantastic. Now, admittedly, the engine power is definitely weak. The power to weight is the worst in this regard. So if you're going to want to utilize that top speed, you really are going to have to be going downhill. But this thing feels considerably faster than you would expect for a tank of this size. So its mobility is not great, but it's not horrendous either, and that makes it very, very usable. Its ground resistances are decent, but not incredible. And now let's talk about the armor, because this armor is really what makes the tank run. It has a base health of 1,950. That's really middle of the pack. It's a lot less than something like the Maustion, but it is more than the MX M451. However, its turret is incredible, and I'm going to show in the upcoming replay. I think you can definitely argue that this turret is arguably as good, if not stronger, than a Mouse's. It has 200 millimeters of armor at the front on the hull, with 120 on the side and 100 on the rear, which means HE shells are not going to be a problem if people are shooting you in the rear. Its turret armor is a very respectable 300 at the front with 150 millimeters on the side, which means you are able to angle this tank's turret and make it much, much stronger. It's very difficult to penetrate this tank in the front even if you're shooting gold. Tanks with 320, 330 millimeters of penetration will be able to go through your turret with consistency, but a lot of tanks at tier 8 and tier 9 really don't have that penetration, and even having something like 310 millimeters of pen, 311 millimeters pen, which the Tiger Mouse does have, is still going to leave you at a considerable disadvantage, and you'll have less than a 50% chance of hitting this tank. Oh, unfortunate miss on the E1 right there, but we will get him back soon enough. Now, if we take a look at the armor layout in a moment, or let's finish up the miscellaneous stats. Its camo, absolutely atrocious. This is not a sneaky tank whatsoever, so pay attention to that. But I really want to demonstrate just how good this tank is in regards to its armor layout. Taking a look at the replay, we've done a ton of damage. We've also managed to get a lot of spotting out, and so really you can see just why this tank is so good at what it does. Its gun allows it to do a lot of different things in a way that you probably wouldn't expect as you go along, and so that makes it incredibly powerful. That shot hit, by the way, and it really makes this thing a pleasure to play because it does multiple things well. It's got a great gun and it's got terrific armor, which we will show right now. Up on your screen, you can see that the Tiger Mouse, against its regular ammunition, can be penetrated in the lower plate. It does have a weak lower plate, but even angled at something like this, the only weakness on the entire tank is that lower plate, which means if you can hide that thing, then you're going to be in a very, very powerful position. Combine that with the fact that this has a rear mounted turret. You can see how the turret's at the back and not the front, means that this thing is an incredible side scraper. It's phenomenal at that. And even if you're willing to fire gold, this is not an auto pen. This is 311 millimeters of penetration. This is a very good amount of penetration, especially for a tier 9 tank. But if you angle your turret like this, not quite at 90 degrees, but if you just add a small angle to it, this is 320 millimeters of effective armor. There's a 20 to 30% chance you penetrate this. You could get penetrated in the side of the turret too, but this is still 314 millimeters, 320 millimeters of effective armor. This upper plate is just, it's not going to get penetrated. Very few tanks are ever going to penetrate this, especially because of how tall the Tiger Mouse is. Shooting down on its lower plate is very, very rare, and so when people shoot up at it, it's going to be a very difficult penetration. Of note, this top armor is very weak. It's only 480 millimeters total, which means if somebody is shooting over you and has a 121 millimeter gun or more, they will auto pen this. However, because this is so tall, very few tanks are going to be shooting down on it. I would say the main thing where this top armor really matters is this thing takes artillery shells incredibly poorly. You saw we were just getting demolished by the artillery in our last replay, and so you need to do everything you can to avoid that. I've taken I would say from tier 10 artillery, even something like a Bat Chat's going to do 300 damage, 400 damage consistently if they hit this tank. Something like T92 is going to do 500 or 600, and that's without penetrating. So this thing is an artillery magnet, and I'm not going to give advice to artillery mains, but this thing, it needs to avoid artillery fire. One final note on the armor. It does have this weak point. However, because it's so tall, it's very, very difficult to hit, and I have not really been getting shot right here whatsoever. But it's something to note, especially if you're shooting down and have that opportunity. This thing's armor is fantastic. It's very, very strong. And if you're able to side scrape and to angle your turret, something like this, as soon as somebody shoots you, you can point the gun at them, and then you can just start devastating your opponents. This thing's armor is amazing. And now we're going to jump off into our final game of today's video. You'll notice I've been playing against tier 9 tanks and tier 10 tanks in both of these replays, and I want to highlight that this thing does not mind playing against tier 10 heavy tanks. This thing can keep up with the best of them, and so while of course it does incredible things against tier 8s, it doesn't fear the tier 10s either. I will also say I don't think I've played against tier 7s yet in this thing after about 20 or 30 battles, but it is definitely something to keep in mind, because this thing against something like a T29, it's unfair. I know, as one last final just tank thing, people will want to know what kind of setup. I am running rammer, I am running turbo, and the turbo is the most important piece of equipment on this, and I am also going to run a hardening device. I don't run hardening on very many tanks. I think generally I'd rather have a better gun, and so you definitely could consider dropping hardening for vents or something. But the reason I'm running hardening is I want to have my tracks up very quickly, and the fact that this thing has such incredible armor means that any sort of extended hit points I have is just going to make it that much more difficult to kill me in the late stages. And so I'm really running it so I can get better track health, better track repair, and that extra health is very useful on top of that, and I think that outweighs the benefits of something like vents, for me at least. Now, our last game, there was a ton of sniping going on, but we are going to finally put this tank in really its ideal scenario, and that is as a side scraper. I make a mistake. I should have fired APCR going into this. However, I realized that I didn't load my APCR going forward, and so that's going to be my biggest misplay of this entire replay. I guess I wasn't paying attention at the start of the game. My philosophy on gold ammo, and I'll probably elaborate more on this as we go along, is that the way I enjoy games is I want to maximize the effectiveness of how I play. I want to run the best things. I want to run the most efficient strategies. I'm going to experiment when I think I can learn more about the game, but I don't think that firing regular shells makes you a saint or makes you better. I think you're just disadvantaging yourself, and I don't enjoy that, so that's not something I'm going to do. I finally loaded in APCR, which is the correct shell, especially as you're fighting something like a mouse, and you're going to see that as we all sling gold together, this thing's armor is just absolutely incredible, and I think you could argue it's better than the mouse's. Right away, our .35 accuracy shows just why this gun is so much better than something like an Object 705. It can hit weak points. You can truly snipe with this thing, and the gun just feels so incredibly comfortable, especially when you're hitting for 535. I think the aim on this thing is a little bit bugged. It's showing green right now for us, but that is definitely not a shell that I can penetrate at this moment in time. And you also notice that as we fire our APCR into something like the Tiger Mouse, even as that tank's cheeks are flat, it's still a very difficult penetration for us. However, something like the mouse, as it faces its turret towards us, is not a difficult penetration. And so I really do think that this tank has a better turret than the mouse does. Of course, you'd rather have the mouse's whole armor, but this thing's turret is just incredible. It feels really, really good, and it gets bounces with regularity in a way that the front of the mouse's turret does not. And right there, we go straight through the front of the mouse with absolute ease. We did not get through the front of the Tiger Mouse easily, and so that's something to keep in mind. Also right now, at least from what we've seen, our team is down by about 3,700 hit points, and so we are even though we're tied on tanks, we are losing. Also, look at what the mouse is doing. He's rocking back and forward, and when that happens, that will generally lift the front of somebody's tank up just a tiny bit more for a millisecond if that happens, and so you need to take advantage of that. Also, notice how I was angling my turret, and the mouse just gave up trying to shoot at me, because as you angle that turret away from your opponents, my penetration is the exact same as the mouse's is, and so that gives me just an incredible opportunity against him. He bounces me with gold, and I was facing my turret straight at him, just showing why my turret is so much better than his, and I go straight through his. I don't think we're going to bounce a shot against this mouse whatsoever. And so, as we go forward, we notice that he's angling his turret. He's doing a good job. And so there's no reason for us to fire right now when we've got the advantage. He can't point his gun at me without taking a shell. I can point my gun at him this whole time. I'm thinking about shooting as he rocks back and forth, but I'm not getting a great shot right now. And there's no reason to give up my advantage, because, oh, we do bounce one. As soon as he points his turret towards me, I have a chance to penetrate him. Unfortunately, this T832 does penetrate me in the side, and I've had just about enough of his shenanigans. I realize that if we're left in a crossfire, bad things are going to happen for my team, and so I push forward to kill the T832. This 7032 ends up killing him, a beautiful shell by him, and a shout out to this tier 8 tank, which has done a ton of work, is serving as a beautiful distraction, and is going to allow us just to clean up this mouse. And so this tier 8 tank is showing you just exactly how annoying it can be to fight against. You can do a lot of great things in a low tier tank, and you can really help carry for your team. This tiger mouse is not paying attention to me. Thankfully, my allies are distracting him, and so I put in a great shell through his lower plate, and we're already up to 4,500 damage. This tiger mouse has fired already. I know I'll get the first shell, and the tiger mouse does have some weaker side armor if it's not angled correctly, and so we go straight through him. And now we're approaching 5,000 damage, and I'm terrified of this Cobra. The Cobra does not have great penetration, but it does have, I would say, the best burst damage in the game outside of the Waffenträger E100, which is only a seasonal tank. And so I'm going to chase this guy and try to do as much damage as I can. I'm thinking about tracking, but I know I want to get damage no matter what. So the fact that he's going straight back like that prevents me from getting in a good shell through his tracks and into his hole. And so he played that well. Much better just to take the damage and not get killed and tracked in that scenario, and it's something you should consider. Now, I'm not going to chase him because I am a slow heavy tank, and I've noticed that this T95 is pressuring my own T95, and as he's distracted, I'm going to be able to put easy shells straight into his weak points. Looks like we overmatched the roof, and so we put in another 591 damage, adding up to our total. And just notice how fast this damage racks up. This rate of fire, very decent. This accuracy allows me to hit weak points with consistency, and it just makes it such a pleasure to play. That was 635 damage. This thing high rolls, it feels like all the time, and so you really just brutalize your opponents. When you're hitting for something like 600 damage, that's huge. And now we're up to 7,000 damage. We're down 10 to 11. We have 4 tanks to the enemy tanks. Enemy team's 5. However, this Cobra has messed up. The Cobra has a poor top speed, and so he's not going to be able to escape. If I connect my shell well, I'm going to aim, and I hit that shot. We're up to 7,300 damage, and I just put in the chat, let's go, dude. I was so excited. That engagement, fighting with that T95, was absolutely beautiful, and I think it showed exactly what makes this tank incredible. Side scraping, this thing is just really unparalleled at tier 9. I'd say outside of something like the T95, this thing might have the best armor at tier 9, and so it's just absolutely dominant in a side scraping position like that. We did a lot more work than that mouse did. We felt so much more comfortable than he ever was able to feel, and we were able to do that with, I think, more speed than he had, with more turret armor, and it was absolutely dominant. Now this WZ113 FT is pushing forward, looking for a shot, and that one connects. That puts us up to 7,839 damage, and I was wondering, can I get to 10,000 damage? Is that possible? Aiming at the lower plate, I've got good accuracy, but that one did not hit, because if it had connected and penetrated, then that WZ would have died. And so unfortunately we miss out on the 8,000 damage there, and the Waffenträger manages to kill the WZ right before we fire, and so now it looks like 8,000 damage is getting just a little less likely. Looks like I'm invited to a platoon to maybe get a brother in arms. I'm not really paying attention to the E100 that gets shut down by the Waffenträger. And right now I'm going, oh man, can I get a shot into the M41? He's not where I expected. I swap to an HE shell. These HE shells do a ton of damage. They do 670 average damage, and I've connected a few of these in game, so they're absolutely deadly, but we won't have a chance to use them as our Waffenträger shuts down the M41, and we finish the game with 7,800 damage, 1,600 blocked, and an absolute carry on a flank against a tier 10 tank and a lot of his minions. And we'll take a quick look at the post-game results. In that first replay, we end up doing about 9,000 damage combined. We have 6,000 damage, 5,998 damage, and a lot of that was blind. We hit 14 shells, penetrated 13, and we finished with 1,322 damage, which is not an ace tanker. I think this is definitely putting the Tiger Mouse in an uncomfortable position. It's not meant to be on a sniping campy map like Prokhorovka, but it still can do a lot of work in an unexpected way because this gun is so accurate and so consistent. We finish with a win, and we make a huge amount of credits. Even despite the fact that we're using battle payments, or I should say this action, the holiday ops bonus, we still would have profited about 170,000 credits, albeit with using premium account with boosters, with clan boosters. Still, this is a huge amount of profit and really demonstrates why this tank is so incredibly powerful. In our second replay, we have an even better result. Absolutely no assistance damage this time, but we rack up 7,839 damage with 4 kills, and that is because I was on an absolute tear. This is an ace tanker because we got 1,660 base XP, and we had another 1,000 or so HP to keep on clubbing with. So if this game had been longer, we would have racked out an even better result. We have, of course, top on damage. We have 4 kills, tied with this very strong game from our Waffenträger ally. And shout out to a T832, which managed to do 3,400 damage in a tier 10 matchup. So absolute great shout out for him. We demolished this mouse. We put in a ton of shells into him. In fact, we hit 5 shots doing 2,321 damage and killing him. We also put in 4 shells into the T95, completely totaling 100% of his HP. Taking a look at our profit, this is 243,000 credits earned, although I am running some boosters and we have the holiday ops bonus. Still a great result and great profit for us. We had 22 shells out of 22, showing why this tank is so accurate. We do bounce a few, although we are firing a very heavily armored tank throughout this replay, and unfortunately bounced a shell against the WZ, which would have netted us 5 kills and over 8,000 damage. It was just not to be this time. So, ladies and gentlemen, the Tiger Mouse. If I had to rate it, and I'll put these on screen, I would say that its armor layout is fantastic. Its armor, just with how strong it is tier for tier, it's going out of 9 out of 10. In fact, let's make it 9.5 out of 10, because this thing is not as well armored as the T95. It doesn't have that legendary layout, but I can't think of another tier 9 tank that I'd rather have in terms of armor and survivability. This thing just tank shells incredibly well, and so 9.5 out of 10 for its armor layout. Its mobility, it's definitely a weakness. I'll say 2.5 out of 10. It's not the slowest thing, it's not a Maushin, it's not a T95, but it is pretty darn slow, and so 2.5 out of 10, that's what's holding this tank back from just being completely unstoppable. And then its gun is really surprising. I don't think you look at the statistics and you're wowed by it, but the combination of alpha damage and DPM and accuracy just makes it really comfortable to use. And I'll say that makes this gun just a 7 out of 10. especially if you were saying comparing it to heavy tanks, it'd be even higher. But when you compare it against things like tier 9 tank destroyer guns, tier 9 medium tank guns, this thing definitely does fall short. And so 7 out of 10 for the gun overall. And then just my final thoughts on this. This is perhaps the best side scraper at tier 9. I think it dethrones the Object 705 because it just does so many things better than the 705 does. And with that being said, I think this tank becomes just I'll say right now, with how excited I am to play it, it's a 9 out of 10 for me. This thing is phenomenal. It racks up damage. It racks up kills. Taking a look at how well I've been performing in this tank, this is my most played tank in the last month or so. I've just had a blast with it. I'm averaging 73% wins. I'm doing 3,300 damage per game, and I'm clubbing out about 3,600 W8, and so I really think that this tank is phenomenal. It's a blast to play, and if you have a chance to get it, then you absolutely should. And that is a great segue to my announcement. Our last giveaway was such a blast. I am throwing up the winner right now, so congratulations to you. I will get in contact with you and we'll figure out how to get you the loot boxes. And because this was such a blast, and because that video did so incredibly well, and because I'm just in a really great mood, I am starting a second giveaway. The exact same conditions as before apply. All you need to do is you need to be subscribed and you need to comment on this Tiger Mouse video. If you comment on this Tiger Mouse video and you are subscribed, then you are eligible to receive loot boxes. And so I will reach out to you and we'll get you your winnings. That's going to be 3 loot boxes, and if it keeps on going well, if we can have some continued success, then I'd love to continue this. This has been a blast. It's been awesome seeing you guys comment, engage, creating a community here, and so I'd love to continue this if I can. And so hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, keep this momentum going. I'm so happy to have you here. I'm Lad, and I'm out.